Good morning, everybody. The time is now 10 o'clock and this inquiry is resumed. This is into an appeal made by Dido Property Limited against the decision of Buckinghamshire Council to refuse planning permission for production, space and supporting buildings for screen-based media and associated services and industries at land adjacent to the A4155 Marlow Road and Westhorpe Farm Lane, Marlow. For anyone new today, my name is Katie MacDonald. I am a Chartered Town Planner and Planning Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to hold this inquiry. This is day number 12. Feels like a marathon, doesn't it? Usual reminders, please. Mobile phones and other electronic devices switch to silent. We should be finishing around 1 o'clock today, if not a little earlier, depending on how long examination in chief takes. No fire drills are planned, so if you do hear the alarm, it is real. Please exit via the staircase at the back of the room, and the assembly point is by the riverside. Toilets are down that corridor to my right, your left, and the accessible toilets just up here. Up to yet, I've heard opening statements from the main parties. I've heard comments from interested parties. I've heard from the appellant's master planner and scheme designer. I have heard evidence on landscape, evidence from the Rule 6 parties. There's been roundtable sessions on ecology and noise. There's been a preliminary session on conditions and the planning obligations. I've heard the need evidence and I've heard the appellant's evidence on economic benefits. Today will be the council's highways witness who will give examination in chief, and I'm also expecting to hear from Joy Morrissey MP. Hello, good morning. Before I do, any procedural or housekeeping matters? Who's going?
There's just one new ID which may not have reached you yet, but it's on its way. I think you asked for some copy of footnote references of Samantha Waite's proof, which is ID 85, and we're awaiting Appendix 1 and 2 for the call sheets, but they will be added to the ID list when we get them.
Thank you very much. Mr. White?
I think we were going to raise the same point.
Yeah, same. We've just got hard copies of those documents if you want them, madam. Otherwise, they're just on the website.
On the website. I might as well take them.
Yeah.
If you've got me a hard copy. Can I go on my pile? Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. After our early finish yesterday, I went and did the ecology site visit. So I think I have done all site visits now, aside from going to look at other studios, which was just drive-bys, essentially, wasn't it, that you wanted me to do? So I've obviously done Pinewood and Shinfield. Which could you perhaps get your heads together and tell me which other studios you want me to go and have a drive through or look at, please?
Madam, yes, I think there was a particular request in relation to Shepperton, but we'll put our heads together.
There was definitely, I know Shepperton was on the list, but I didn't know what else was.
Yes, Shepperton, and I think Leavesden, particularly in the light of the Rule 6, not the Rule 6, the individual this week talking about the proximity of residential homes. So I think those two would be worthwhile
looking at. Okay. Any others off the top of your head, Mr. Kershaw and Councillor Crabtree? Okay. Yeah. I'm probably not going to get to those next Monday. I might do them after I've closed the inquiry that week after. Anybody any objections to me looking at those after I've closed it? No. Okay.
I mean, we would endorse Mr. Kershaw's suggestion as well, because frankly, Leavesden to Elstree is literally 10 minutes.
Oh, cool.
So very close together.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll go and have a look at those. Yeah, I think it'll probably be after we've closed that week. We'll see if I can fit it in. Okay. Anything else to raise before I hear from the MP? No. Okay. Miss Morrissey, would you like to come up to the witness table, please? I was going to call it a stand then, but it's not a stand, is it? Do you have something prepared in writing? Yes, that would be really helpful, just so I don't need to take notes verbatim. It's helpful to me, thank you. And the mic, you might just need to tap it just to turn it on. There should be a little like rubber button somewhere on top of it.
I don't.
You're definitely on. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here for the inquiry on day 12. That's very exciting. And I apologize, I'll read it in a sort of very boring fashion. So, but thank you so much for having me. And I want to start by paying tribute to the local community groups that have been very, very active over the years in calmly and professionally setting out the case for why this application wasn't the right one. And it has been a genuine privilege to work closely with them for the last few years leading to this moment. And today I want to set out the grounds on which I believe this appeal and the application should be dismissed. They are fivefold: failure to meet the high bar needed for release of Greenbelt, weak and uncertain economic benefits, conflict with local development plan, wider development harms, and lack of public support. So this application has, I would say consistently, I've been involved since sort of the start of this, consistently failed to meet the higher bar required to relinquish Greenbelt land and to get anywhere near mitigating the traffic impacts, despite the generous time Buckinghamshire Council and Strategic Sites Committee afforded the application to have a second go when it was originally deferred. And traffic was a very large mitigating factor in that. Let me turn first to Greenbelt, and I quote from the planning officer's report: would constitute inappropriate development and would result in very significant spatial and visual harm to openness of Greenbelt and in significant loss of open countryside and be in conflict with the fundamental purpose of Greenbelt policy. I have said this consistently from the onset of my objection, and I agree with the planning officers on this point. The Greenbelt matters, and it is why I have campaigned tirelessly to strengthen those rules, both when in government and now in opposition. And it is the grounds alone, I believe, to reject this. And this is why it was rejected at the strategic sites stage. And it remains the case today. Now, please, I beg you, please don't fall for the argument that this is poor quality Greenbelt. It is emphatically not. It is demonstrated by the representation from statutory and other stakeholders as important Greenbelt land. Now, I believe the new government is choosing to weaken Greenbelt protection, but I suspect the applicant's appeal was in part emboldened by a belief that planning relaxation would come their way prior to this inquiry. But even against the revised national planning policy framework on Greenbelt, this application falls at the first hurdle. I know you'll be familiar with the revised Greenbelt provision, but it seems appropriate to reiterate, since why not? We're here on a Friday and it's day 12, so why not reiterate the 5 purposes of Greenbelt? To check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas, to prevent neighboring towns merging into one another, to assist in safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, to preserve the setting and special characteristics of historic towns, and to assist in urban regeneration by encouraging the recycling and derelict of other urban land. This part of Greenbelt is clearly serving a number of those purposes, and the original planning officer's recommendation to the Strategic Sites Committee remains pertinent. I repeat, it would constitute inappropriate development and would result in very significant spatial and visual harm to the openness of the Greenbelt and in significant loss of open countryside and in conflict with the fundamental purpose of Greenbelt policy. Now, the key test remains as set out in 153 of the NPPF. When considering any planning application, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the Greenbelt, including harm to its openness, inappropriate developments, and inappropriate development is by definition harmful to Greenbelt and should not be approved except in special circumstances. And again, quoting from the NPPF, very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to Greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm resulting from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. The applicants have, it seems to me, persisted to try to argue that the economic case for their development clearly outweighs anything else. And I'll set out later why this is not only the case now, but is not a tenable position for the future. But It has now disappeared without a trace thanks to the economic market realities set out just last week by Pinewood Studios. We have had 154 and 155 of the revised NPPF to consider in terms of appropriate development in Greenbelt. This application meets none of those criteria. It also meets none of the criteria of 155 either, taking two specific areas in respect to A, this land has not been designated as gray belt, and B, there is no unmet need as Pinewood Studios and other studios exist in the locality and indeed are now underutilized, as you were so eloquently pointing out earlier today about your visits, which is wonderful to see, so you can see geographically how close all of these studios actually are. And let me now turn to the key myth I would love to bust this morning, that there is an economic case for this development. The film industry has and is a significant contributor to the UK economy, and I am proud to support the fantastic film school in my constituency that helps to produce most of the talent used in the industry. But this is an industry where the demand for film studios is falling, and this demand simply will not create local jobs. Let me turn first to demand. As I set out in my contribution to the Strategic Sites Committee, when it considered this application, according to the British Film Institute data, HETV and film production fell 40% in 2023. The latest figure from the BFI clearly show that the UK production industry is continuing to suffer. Full year expenditure for 2023 is lower than anticipated and growth remains weak. Whilst feature film production appears to have recovered from the Hollywood strikes, spending on high-end television is well below the peaks seen in 2022. This reflects the structural changes taking place within the streaming industry, changes that I believe will have a long-term impact on UK inward investment. The demand trend is emphatically downwards, and with so many film studios already in our vicinity, the case for a further studio is simply not there. These studios, by their very nature, also have most people coming in from across the country or from overseas, then leaving post-production, meaning there will be no local jobs created. We also now have very specific proof points that demand for studios is falling. Pinewood Studios issued a press release on the 30th of January announcing a public consultation on shifting the focus on its planned expansion away from the studio growth to a mixed-use development due to falling demand, with the CEO saying, "We are a dynamic business in a fast-moving industry, and we are committed to invest in the ongoing expansion of Pinewood Studios. The reduction in global content production, combined with rising construction costs and business rates, triggered a review of our existing planning consent, and we believe the revised proposals provide a credible alternative." So, Pinewood, also in my constituency, so they're both in my area, is an established world-renowned studio and has had to change its expansion plans due to falling demand. Where does the applicant think its demand will now come from? I noted that during this inquiry, the applicant's economic expert had to guide their own estimate of 4,000 jobs, saying it was unreliable. I would argue it is not only unreliable, it is simply not going to materialize. This gets to the heart of the weakness of this application. Even if you don't share my own view that the economic case is very, very weak, the reality is that the economic case is at best uncertain, unreliable, and prone to market change. Pinewood is a real, near, and compelling proof of this fact. To allow a film studio to meet the high bar needed to release Greenbelt, lose that Greenbelt, but then find an unused studio irreversibly in its place, would be wrong and catastrophic. The applicants have never been able to answer this basic question. All of the potential sites for the film studio in the UK is there really only this patch of greenbelt available for this site? But this application also fails in other key tests. The traffic impacts are severe and significant, and the applicant has failed time and time again to grasp the magnitude of the disruption that this would have on Marlow and the surrounding areas. We already have significant traffic congestion around the area, and this will only continue to intensify it. This is because it simply cannot be mitigated. This is further grounds for refusal, as Buckinghamshire Highways have set out, and I think you're going to hear from them later today. The NPPF again sets out clearly that development in the Greenbelt also need regard to both 110 and 115. 110, the planning system, should achieve managed patterns of growth in support of these objectives. Significant development should be focused on locations which are or can be sustainable through limiting the need to travel and offering a genuine choice of transport models. This can help to reduce congestion and emissions and improve air quality and public health. However, the opportunities to maximize sustainable transport solutions will vary between urban and rural areas, and this should be taken into consideration in both planning and making decisions. 115 is assessing sites that may be allocated for development in plans or specific applications for development. It should ensure that A, sustainable transport models are prioritized, taking account of the vision for the site, the type of development, and its location. B, safe and sustainable access to the site can be achieved for all users. C, the design of streets, parking areas, and transport elements and the content associated standards reflect current national guidance, including the National Design Guide and National Model Design Code 48. And D, any significant impact from development on transport networks in terms of capacity and congestion or on highway safety can be cost-effectively mitigated to acceptable degrees through a vision-led approach. And you have all that to look forward to after what I'm saying. So I don't want to give too much away from the highways. This application demonstratedly fails both of these tests despite having months to try to find ways to meet them. It couldn't because this is the wrong development in the wrong location. There are then also the harms that were set out so clearly and compellingly by the planning officers and accepted by the Strategic Sites Committee to the AONB, to Little Marlow Country Park, and to the heritage of the area, just to name a few. Crucially, this is in controversy to the 5 local development plan policies. The local plan matters and should be a significant weight in this decision. Finally, I hope over the course of this inquiry, it has become clear that development is strongly opposed by my constituents. The weight of individual objections is clear. The parish poll was decisive. Let me briefly say that the parish poll was extraordinary. I know a bit about getting people to vote in elections, and it's not as easy as you think. It's a lot harder than you think. And turnout was comparable to local government by-elections despite significantly short time periods to vote, no polling cards being issued. There was no reminders sent out to people and no postal votes. So the result was emphatic and decisive, and an impressive voter turnout for this was something that I've never seen before actually in a parish poll. So to conclude, Greenbelt test not met either before the revised NPPF or after. Traffic impacts not mitigated, conflicts with 5 policies of the local development plan, harms to the AONB, Little Marlow Country Park, and the residential amenities in the area, an economic case that is weak and worsening and blown away by the practical realities put in the public domain by an established world-renowned film studio just miles away. This has also been a bad application with little future, the wrong development at the wrong time in the wrong location, causing significant harms. I hope that you will dismiss this appeal, bring a final end to this application, and allow this Greenbelt land to be retained. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I should have asked you before, would you be happy to take questions?
Of course, of course.
Mr. White or Mr. Fraser, do you have any questions? Okay, then you don't need to take any questions.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'll be on my way.
Okay,
Thank you so
thank
much.
you very much for coming and
Thank
making
you.
time.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
You too. Like bringing an actor in. We're ready for you. Any core docs to have up apart from proofs and rebuttals? Thank you.
Obviously, the proofs and appendices of Mr. Tester and also Mr. Dix, the statement of common ground, the most updated statement of common ground. In terms of core documents, I think 2-118, 2105 A S T Y and X.
Hang on, 105.
A.
Hang on, I'm going back up to 105.
Yeah, but this is the
105A. Yep.
then S.
Yep.
Then T.
Yep.
And then Y.
Yep.
Then X. Sounds like a game of Scrabble, doesn't it?
That would be more fun.
Yes. And then CD1-238 A and C.
Two, 3, 8, A and C.
And then CD6-12, which is LTN 120. There probably will be other.
Sorry, the last one I didn't get.
Sorry, CD6.
CD6.
Stroke 12.
Okay.
And there may be others as we go through, but having those will, I think, help.
Super. Good morning, Mr. Tester.
Good morning. Well, checking it's on.
You're on.
Tester, I could introduce you. You're Del Tester. You're an incorporated engineer, fellow of the Institute of Highway Engineers, and a member of the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation. And you're a managing director of Origin Transport Consultants Limited, and you act for the local highway authority, Buckinghamshire Council on Highways and Transport Matters. And your public sector experience was gained working in the Highways Department of Oxfordshire County Council and Buckinghamshire Council for a period of 10 years. You've also worked in the private sector for a total of 24 years. A large part of that is in parallel with your ongoing public sector consultancy work. And Origin Consultants, as you say in paragraph 1.3, is highways, traffic and transportation consultancy, and you are the effectively framework consultants to Buckinghamshire Council Highways Department Development Management, and your role in this respect is the framework director.
That's correct.
And you're responsible for leading the assessment of the more complex and strategic highways and transport implications of major development proposals, of which this is one, and you're personally familiar with the site and its surroundings, having visited, including with the inspector yesterday.
Indeed, a nice frosty morning.
Good. Madam, I intend to take all of the written evidence as read, if you're content with that. What I was going to do is go...
I have read it, but I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot there. There's a lot on both sides of highways.
What we will do, Madam, with subject to your agreement, is go to the areas of disagreement, which in 110 of the Statement of Common Ground, and use those as a structure, not in the order they appear in the bullet points. We'll deal with, in terms of the issues, the modal shift, the effectiveness of the operational management plan, the design of the pedestrian and cycle facilities, and the new Volvo Bridge first, and then move on to other matters as set out in the areas of disagreement.
I should have perhaps said you've estimated 2 hours. If you just let me know when you feel like a comfort break would be helpful.
Equally, Mr.
Yeah,
Tester,
thank you.
if you feel like a break, do indicate. Good. So we have the Statement of Common Ground, the second Statement of Common Ground, Mr. Tester, which sets out the areas of agreement and the disagreement. And in terms of trip generation, we just touch on that. That's picked up at 1.5 of the Statement of Common Ground. no dispute in relation to trip generation.
No, they're both the managed and unmanaged trip generation scenarios we've now reached an agreement on, as confirmed in the statement of common ground.
Okay. They will come back to a number of matters which are agreed in due course, but if we could just start and set the context for the areas of disagreement, and firstly, the challenges which the site and its location present in terms of sustainable travel. We could start with that, please.
Yes, so in my proof at section 6, I set out that the site is severed from Marlow by the A404. The A404 Westhorpe interchange and the A4155 represent an imposing environment for cyclists and pedestrians, in my opinion, and that makes it challenging for that mode of travel to be attractive. It's a high-speed, high-traffic environment. It's the connection between the strategic road network and the A-class distributor road, so it's a road-dominated environment.
Just temper the speed a little.
Of course.
Yes, make sure you're picked up. Okay.
I'm going too fast, just slow me down.
And in terms of the extent of the physical and psychological barrier, what's your view of the A404?
I think it is an intimidating and dominating environment. I mean, it's imposing. As somebody that's trying to walk or cycle across the interchange, it's something that isn't attractive or comfortable in my view. I've ridden across it, as I've said in evidence as well, and it's just not comfortable. It's psychologically just a difficult barrier to want to walk or cycle across.
And how does that influence existing levels of walking and cycling across the interchange?
So existing levels of movements by walking and cycling across the interchange are low. That's as evidenced in the baseline mode share for the area, which has very low levels of walking or cycling. I think in the surveys of the existing movements, I think we're talking about in the order of 4 movements by active travel in both peak hours as existing, so very low.
Yeah, let's just go to page 82 of your proof, where I think you've got the data in table 2.3 on page 82, which is an extract from the walking, cycling and horse riding assessment. 82, madam. Yeah. And table 2.3.
That's correct.
See the Westhorpe Junction, see the baseline and, sorry. That's okay, that's fine, madam. That may be easier anyway. It's in Mr. Tester's main proof. 10, I think. Page 82, and it's table 2.3. And you'll see it just beneath figure 19, the extract, where it's extracted from, which is the walking, cycling and horse riding assessment, which is core document 2-105T, just so you've got the core document reference for that. And it says just we can see in the top line of the table, the Westhorpe Junction. And what does that show?
As I described earlier, that shows, so you have 3 people it describes it as in and out, but that's just walking in different directions across the Westhorpe interchange. So the top row is the existing baseline recorded movements at the junction by active travel. So that's walking and cycling. It shows 4 movements in total in the AM peak hour between 8 and 9, 4 movements between 5 and 6, and a daily total of only 38 people trips.
And in terms of the, how would you describe the experience of, so we're crossing the junction? We'll come back to this in a little bit more detail when we look at the improvements.
Yeah, it's not pleasant. You are in a high-speed, traffic-dominated environment, as I said earlier. So, you know, it can feel quite intimidating. Walking along there, we've walked all the way, colleague and I, for preparation of the planning through the consideration of planning application and for the appeal. We've walked all the way along there from the Bourne End direction all the way across Westhorpe and into Marlow. Now the section that is west and including Westhorpe interchange, east and including Westhorpe interchange is it feels very rural, it feels very high speed, it feels very traffic dominated and quite enclosed in terms of walking on a narrow footway. And then of course you cross Westhorpe and you're perched above a grade separated road which is beneath you, and again it's a noisy, loud, just a traffic dominated environment.
And if we go to core document 2/105T, which is the walking, cycling and horse riding assessment, and go to page 47 of that. Yeah, Adam, it's CD2/105T. And PDF 47.
My PDFs aren't working now.
Oh dear. Big PDF issues. Paragraph 2.140.
I think I may need to connect to the Wi-Fi again. Unfortunately, it's yeah, half the documents are not showing. Now with you. So 2/105T.
That's right, and PDF page 47.
Yep.
And 2.140, just the description there of the pedestrian environment.
Yes, it says in 2.140 towards the bottom of the paragraph that well, in the middle of the bottom of the paragraph that the section of the route that traverses the Westhorpe interchange is unfavourable. This is due to the high traffic flows that this interchange experiences, therefore not allowing much time for pedestrians and cyclists to cross safely. It also then says that for pedestrians with reduced mobility, this poses an issue.
And then in 2.141.
Yes, it says the footway bridge crossing the A404 was measured at approximately 2.2 metres. Whilst this meets guidance for pedestrians, this is not sufficient for cyclist use. Furthermore, the parapet height of the railings on the bridge are not suitable for cyclist use.
Then I think in 2.147, it looks at the width of the shared footway, cycleway on the eastern and western sides of the interchange.
Yes, it says that it reduces to a width of just over 2 metres on both sides of the interchange. And it acknowledges that this is insufficient width to accommodate both pedestrians and cyclists comfortably, and also that it may discourage cyclists from using the interchange. It also notes that there are no barriers or fencing to protect cyclists when crossing the interchange. This is quite important because there are level differences, as you have seen, Adam, from your site visit, on both sides of the interchange.
And then I think if we go on to PDF page 49. General description or overall description of the environment at 2.148.
Yes, it confirms my view that it's likely to be an unpleasant experience with cyclists compromising their safety navigating the junction due to the high traffic flows and uncontrolled crossing points on the A404 slips, although the uncontrolled crossing points do change.
Good. Then in terms of the Westhorpe Junction itself, and here in the context of traffic, I mean, both you and Mr. Dix identifies there are issues with that junction. And
Yep.
Indeed, the council has previously had an improvement scheme which did not progress.
That's correct. There was an improvement scheme for Westhorpe that the council had, and one of the main aims of that, well, there's a couple of main aims with that. One was to try and manage the queues on the A404 slips, but it was also quite importantly to provide improved access to the Globe Business Park. And that scheme had many iterations of modelling and design arrangements to try and get approval of National Highways.
Then I think can we move to the issue of the targets, the mode share target case, which you described as ambitious. In terms of the trip generation, we say that is now agreed, as you've pointed out. We just pick up one point in relation to that, because we go to your rebuttal proof, and there are other references in your main proof, but in your rebuttal proof at 2.4, you say there at 2.4, the chip generation potential of the appeal site, even in the unmanaged scenario, where there are no additional mode shift assumptions applied, is based on sites with a mode share by car driver that's lower than that assumed by the appellant. It represents a reasonable future scenario for a site that is accessible by all modes of travel. And Mr. Dix, in his rebuttal, proved to you in terms of and this is his page 7 of his rebuttal proof dealing with trip rates.
Just bear with me.
Section 3.8 onwards, paragraph 3.8 onwards.
Yes.
And in 3.9, he's here referring to your main proof, but it was the same point you made in your rebuttal. Your claim that due to the above, the unmanaged trip rates agreed for Marlow already included some allowance for trips made by non-car modes of transport. The proposed 24.2% modalship would be a further reduction on the percentage of vehicle use set out. This is not correct. And as I understand it, you accept that in terms of the unmanaged trip rates, they do not include an allowance for trips made by non-car modes of transport.
Well, they do, but not to the extent that I initially thought. And we've agreed that the unmanaged trip rates are based on the mode share for the existing area. So it's been based on chip generation from various film studio sites that got to total person trips And then that's been shared out, for want of a simpler term, between the various modes of travel for the local area.
So in terms of that correction, does it make any difference to your overall analysis?
No.
Okay.
Could you just repeat that answer again, just to help me understand? Because your evidence, I know that it's agreed now, but what I understood from the original was that it was to do with the fact that you thought the trip rates were too low. Is that right? Because they were based on. Just explain your answer again.
Yeah. Effectively, yeah, we thought that the way that they'd done the unmanaged trip rates already allowed for some mode share, because the trip rates from Shepperton in particular and Pinewood already had were based on total trips with a higher lower mode share by car. So that meant a higher mode share by non-car modes. However, having reviewed all of the evidence again, going back to the original TA, we accept that what they've done is whilst they did come up with a trip generation figure, a trip rate, and sorry if I'm losing you, then stop me. Whilst they did come up with a trip rate that was based on those other sites, they didn't use that going forward. They then used they came up with a figure of total person trips, so all person trips, so walking, cycling, public transport, and the car, and then shared that total number of people out by the various different modes for Marlow. So the baseline mode share for Marlow, for instance, got an 84.2% mode share by car. So the total person trips in the unmanaged is based on that 84.2% by car. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you, madam. And if we just go, please, to CD2/105X. Which is I think the second supplementary transport assessment, and PDF page 27.
Yes.
We have the mode share split for Wickham 020.
That's correct. So as I was just saying, so this is the mode share for the local area as it exists where the site is situated. And you'll see there that the driver mode share is 84.2%, people cycling 1.4%, people on foot 6.2%. So that's how the unmanaged total person trips have been separated out. 27.
Madam, it's 27, and it should be in paragraph 2.52. There's a table 5. Yeah. And you can see the 84.2 under driving a car or a van. And in terms of the 60% figure, having regard to the context, the nature of the development proposed, the nature of the employees, your judgment on its realism.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said in evidence, we don't think that 60% is achievable, which is why we've historically and now we refer to the unmanaged trip generation scenarios as being more realistic to judge the likely impacts of the development on the highway network. And that's based on our consideration of the travel plans from other film studio sites that have been referred to in both in my evidence and Mr. Dix's evidence, and in the framework travel plan and many other documents. Looking at those sites, it doesn't give me confidence that it's a reasonable prospect that they will achieve that 60% mode share sustainable transport strategy level.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in due course. And just in terms of the nature of the production staff and the relevance of that and how they're employed and how they operate in terms of travel measures and travel plan measures.
From what we've seen from other sites and from the various other TAs that I've read from other film studios, permanent employees seem to be quite low, and those are the ones that the travel plans seem to be most concerned with or can control. There are low levels of staff, for instance, in the Pinewood travel plan surveys. There's low levels of staff, permanent staff in the Shepperton surveys. At Warner Brothers as well, Leavesden, which has been referred to by Mr. Dix. I think there are only 150 permanent staff members there. So the sample sizes are all quite small. And the nature, the context of that is some of these sites can have, from what I've read, 1,500 people on site at any one time. So that's a control element of what seems to be a very small proportion of the overall people on site. And even then, the travel plans that I've seen show that hardly anybody walks or cycles, and there are low levels of public transport usage.
Then let's just look to the measures which are proposed, and you can give your view to the inspector in terms of, for example, the quality of what's proposed and the prospects of it assisting in enabling that target to be met. Can we start, please, first with the footway cycleway measures?
Yes, so there are improvements to the footway cycleway network being proposed on the A4155 across Westhorpe. However, they don't meet the requirements of LTM 120 in part. And I would say that the requirements to meet LTM 120, when you're trying to achieve a significant mode shift towards sustainable modes and encourage people to walk across what is a dominating environment to start with, they should be more than the bare minimum requirements to meet the standards. It should go beyond that. And there are tests in LTM 120 about coherence, about comfort, about perceived safety, about directness that I think are not achieved.
And if we just go to your main proof, please, on 622. You've drawn from LTM 120 the 5 core design principle.
Bear with me.
It's on page 66 of your main proof.
That's correct. So on page 66, paragraph 6.22, I set out what it describes as the do's and don'ts in LTM 120 in relation to core design principles. You can see there that the core design principles, as I've just said, include being coherent. So it says that cycle networks should allow people to reach their day-to-day destinations easily along routes that are simple to navigate and are consistently high quality. They should be direct. Cycle routes should be at least as direct and preferably more direct than those available for private motor vehicles. They should be safe. Not only must cycle infrastructure be safe, it should be perceived to be safe. And I think that's quite important in this environment as well, perceived to be safe, so that more people feel able to cycle. The final one says it should be comfortable. Comfortable conditions for cycling require routes with adequate width for the volume of use. There's minimal stopping and starting.
Good. And before we look at the crossing across the Westthorpe Junction itself, we just go over the page to figure 14 of your proof, where you've set out the 4 crossings which would need to be made for use of the cycle and footway. Just in terms of the number of crossings, how does that bear on the core principles that you've identified?
Well, I think it's not comfortable. It's a barrier, I think, because you're having to stop and give way 4 times immediately as you leave the site. And I think that's quite important. So immediately upon arriving or leaving the site, you've got all these interruptions crossing major road corridors. So it detracts from being attractive and comfortable, in my opinion.
Then in terms of the crossing 2 and 3, and indeed the crossing over the Westthorpe interchange, I think you picked that up at 655 of your proof, which is on page 76, where you set out what the guidance indicates in terms of the width required, and you then appraise the scheme. You can just summarize your view on the adequacy of what is proposed, having regard to the target which is to be achieved.
Having regard to that target, I think it should be beyond the bare minimum. You know, if you're going to do something that doesn't meet minimum standards, then that immediately detracts from meeting that target, in my opinion. I say here that based on the guidance, and there's a basic principle that we haven't touched on as yet, that LTM 120 says that cyclists must be separated from pedestrians, and it's quite clear that that is the starting point. Now it does, I'm sure we'll go on to it, it does allow for situations where shared surface footway cycleways are allowed or permitted, but that shouldn't be the default situation, in my view, particularly where you're trying to encourage those movements. What I say here in 6.55 is that the overall minimum width, taking into account the separation that's required between a footway cycleway and the carriageway, and the footway and the separation that's required from other measures, the minimum width should be 4.2 metres. At Westthorpe, we don't get that.
And why does that matter in your view?
Again, it's the attractiveness to perceived safety. I think if you've got a narrower facility, you risk colliding with pedestrians and other users. I happen to be using a fairly narrow shared footway cycleway over the weekend, and somebody with a child came crashing into me on a bike. So the wider the facility, the more comfortable, the more attractive it is, and I think crossing such an intimidating environment such as that grade separated junction and the slip roads, it should be good quality, comfortable, and perceived to be safe.
And you mentioned that the guidance recognises that there may be some situations where shared use is appropriate, and you've set those out at 663 of your proof on page 79.
I do. It says, I say it's recognised that paragraph 6.5.6 of LTM 120 suggests that shared use may be appropriate in some situations. These include alongside interurban and arterial roads where there are few pedestrians, at and around junctions where cyclists are generally moving at slow speed, including in association with TUCM facilities. So that's signal control crossings. In situations where a length of shared use may be acceptable to achieve continuity of a cycle route, and in situations where cycle traffic and high cycle and high pedestrian flows occur at different times.
And then you go on, I think in 667 on page 80, to address the position that even were a 3 metre shared use facility accepted, it would still require additional width for buffers between the carriageway edge and vertical features. As such, the minimum width would be 3.5 plus additional clearance of 0.5 for the parapet, taking the requirement to 4 metres.
That's correct.
Yeah, what is available?
At most, 3.7 meters across that area, but on immediate on either side of the junction where you have to stop and turn to go around the rest of the roundabout, if you like, that facility drops to 2.7 meters wide, and that's on top of an embankment as well.
I think that's the point you made at 669.
Yes, I make it at 668 with regard to the western side of Westhorpe. There's the width is reduced to 2.7 meters at the top of an embankment. That there's no buffer from the carriageway and no buffer at the rear to account for a potential fence that would in itself require an additional buffer in accordance with table 5.3 of between 0.25 and 0.5 meters. So at that point, my view is that it should be 3.75 meters. It's 2.7, and that's in the context, as I say, of coming off and needing to turn immediately. On the eastern side, I say at 6.69, that the proposals indicate that the facility would be 3.2 meters wide. Again, at this point, I say that it should be 3.75 to accord with the minimum standards for a shared use facility, which again is not the optimum requirement in any event.
And then I think in 670 you draw your overall conclusion as to what is proposed, having regard to the LTN 120 guidance, and indeed your experience having used the Westhorpe interchange.
Yes, I say that the footway cycleway arrangement across Westhorpe is, in my view, substandard, indirect, incoherent, likely perceived to be unsafe, unattractive and intimidating. So I don't think that that helps meet the aims of the significant mode share, or the ambitious, as the appellant describes it, mode share targets.
Mr. Dick says, well, this is already a signed cycle route signed by the County Council, so it must be safe. In terms of the situation with the development in place, how do you appraise the adequacy of what is proposed?
As I described earlier, the existing levels of usage there are extremely low. That facility was created or allowed at a time that predates LTN 120, and clearly wasn't there to provide access to a significant new development, and those significant increased numbers of movements that want to be achieved. So going back to that table that we looked at earlier, to recall which one it was now.
This is on page 82 of your
It is on
proof,
there.
table 2.3.
So if you look at the proposed numbers, particularly the right-hand column, so the daily numbers go from the existing demands very low at 38 person trips, and the proposed via Westhorpe is 488. So a significant intensification in use.
Then in terms of walking and cycling, there's also the potential for the Volvo bridge replacement to the southwest of the site. You just update the inquiry to the extent you can on National Highways' position in relation to the application.
Yes, my understanding is that National Highways are still considering the proposals and haven't given, certainly as of yesterday or the day before, that I don't think they've concluded their position on the acceptability of it.
And in terms of your position, in terms of the principle of a replacement bridge, if you could just set out that position, then we'll come to look at the detail of what is proposed.
In principle, a replacement bridge would be a good thing. We accept that, but again, it comes back to the attractiveness of the facility for the intended purpose. At the moment, the bridge that's there serves a recreational use. The context changes.
And if we go to your main proof, and this is just after table 2.3 on page 82, you've got a Volvo footbridge section. And you also have your appendix D, which sets out the comparative walking and cycling distances via the Westhorpe interchange or the full footbridge. They're set out. And then in terms of the footbridge, you deal with the existing position and also the proposed on pages 84 and 85 onwards. Just in terms of the existing footbridge, in terms of a means for active travel, were the film studios in place? Your assessment?
I think the appellants acknowledged that it's not a DDA compliant route. It's not suitable for cyclists. It's got stepped access. Yeah, it's not well overlooked. It's not well lit. It's just it's got a substandard deck width. It's got substandard parapet height. It's not a good feature for access to a film studio.
Then in terms of the proposal, which is the subject of the planning application, I think you set out various options I think were considered by the appellant, and that's set out at 689 of your proof on page 89. They were set out in the WCHAR. Option 1 is that which was effectively taken forward in the application, as you set out at 690, and then 691 you appraise the proposed replacement bridge, and perhaps if you could summarize your position there again in the context of the attractiveness of the route with the bridge in place, having regard to the mode share target which is sought to be achieved.
I think we accept that the bridge will be a DDA compliant bridge. I think the issue we have with it, or I have with it, is that the arrangement of the ramps extend walking distances, because to get DDA compliant they have to be reduced gradients, and also the arrangement in the deck. I think it's a decked arrangement with some sections that are hidden potentially by other sections as you go up. So whilst it is a DDA compliant facility that could be used by cyclists and it could be used by pedestrians, I think the setting of it and the fact that it's not well overlooked, it's not well lit, still I don't find that it would be an attractive proposition.
And I think in terms of distance at 699 of your proof on page 91, you identify the extent of the ramps which would have to be negotiated, and how do those distances bear on the attractiveness?
Well, they reduce the attractiveness because the need to get DDA compliant ramps means that you've got ramps of nearly 200 metres on, additional 200 metres on both sides of the bridge. So in addition to the bridge span, you've got those increased distances on both sides. So you have to zigzag up.
Okay. Anything else you wanted to say on walking and cycling? If not, we'll move to bus service.
I don't think so.
Okay, let's move to the bus service, and this you pick up at 6.4 of your proof, and you acknowledge the bus service which is proposed to be provided, and that in terms of the level of provision, it satisfies the council's requirements.
Yes, it does.
And in terms of bus usage, what is your concern in relation to the, as it were, the nature of the use here, those who'll be using the site and the propensity to have recourse to bus?
I think this goes back to my comment earlier about the the baseline situation in the area that shows low levels of bus usage. The information that we've seen from other travel plans, from Pinewood, from Shepperton, from Leavesden, suggests that not huge numbers of people use the bus. I know at Pinewood it's remained fairly static over a number of surveys, and it's been at quite a low level. I think it's as little as 1%, 2% for public transport usage at Pinewood. And I think at Shepperton it's again around 1% for bus. So low levels, and I think the targets are challenging at this site. I think they're setting a 15% target for bus usage, which seems to be at odds with what we've seen from the other sites. And the nature of use, as I've explained in evidence, is from my perspective, people carrying tools, people being on site for brief amounts of time, doing jobs that they've been called in to do. It doesn't seem to suggest that there's going to be such a high demand for bus usage.
And in terms of a local benefit, you do recognise that there would be some local benefit in terms of the ability to use the bus service.
Yeah, so the bus service at Pinewood has been used by local residents. That's been recorded in their surveys, so that there is the potential for some vehicle miles to be saved in terms of that usage by local people.
Then I think in terms of other measures, there is car park management proposed. And if we take up core document 2105X, which is the framework travel plan. And go within that to call PDF 66. Which is in a section headed Monitor and Manage on the previous page and deals with automatic number plate recognition and on-site car parking monitoring.
Yes.
And then we see in the text itself at 7:11 that access to secure plots and the car park provision on the site will be controlled by ANPR, ensuring that access is only granted to authorised pre-registered staff and pre-booked visitor vehicles. And then 7:13, conditions of employment will be used to control vehicular access to the site with the requirement to pre-register, potential for time-restricted entry and exits. And to prevent studio-related parking on surrounding streets, unauthorised vehicles attempting to access the site and or MSCPs will be denied access and turned away. How do you appraise those measures in terms of restricting cars and other vehicles coming to the site itself?
Well, it doesn't necessarily restrict them coming to the site, it just restricts them getting into the site. So those could still be movements on the network that take place. And if they're turned away from the site, they may therefore search for somewhere else to go to park, which could cause other problems. There are measures in the 106 that we recognise to secure CPZ funding to implement controlled parking zones around the site should the need arises. But the fact that people obviously can still come and just get turned away from the site, and there are additional traffic movements on an already congested network, then that could still be an issue.
Then I said we would come back to the realism of the travel plan. So you've mentioned travel plans at other studios, so we can just turn to that. And in terms of your analysis of what has been achieved at other studios and the relevance of that to the assessment of the proposals here. We can touch as necessary on section 4 of your main proof, where you have the examples.
Yes, so section 4 of my proof does set out the consideration of available travel plans and travel information from other film studios that we could find in the public domain. So I've considered Pinewood Studios, Elstree Studios, Shepperton and Holyport. Starting with Pinewood, we know that they've done 3 surveys, 2013, 2016 and 2022. As shown in the table on page 32 of my proof. And that shows that car or van mode share is around, well, in excess of 80% in all 3 years. As I said, with regard to the bus usage earlier, the Pinewood shuttle bus, it says here is only used by between 1% and 2%. So that's fairly low. So, you know, in terms of confidence that whilst a good bus service will be provided from this site, the number of users from the evidence available from Pinewood certainly shows that it could be fairly low. I know that Pinewood has been affected to a certain extent by members of staff moving further away from the site, and that they say may have impacted some of their sustainable choices, and the reason why single occupancy vehicles have remained fairly high. Again, yeah, the sample size was quite low, reflecting that they could only survey their permanent staff.
And then at 427 of your proof, you have the Shepperton survey, which I think is a 2015 survey.
Yes, so there's actually 3 surveys that have been undertaken at Shepperton. Just go to my 27. This one is a 2015 survey result. I think it's the most recent one. Again, it shows public bus 1%. It doesn't actually set out a shuttle bus, but that's the only public transport measure we've got to look at here. Again, it shows walking 1%, cycling 2%, so low. It does show car driver alone, so single occupancy vehicles at 57%, but it then does go on to say that 34% were car sharing, so more than one person in the vehicle. So the total number of vehicles is somewhere in excess of the 57%, in my view.
And in terms of we go to your appendix, it's called document 906, which is the Shepperton travel plan. If we can just look at that, please, just to see the sample size and who was actually sampled. So core document 906, and I think paragraph 3.8.1, page 16.
Yes, it says that with regard to the heading existing workforce, that approximately 85 Shepperton staff are located at Shepperton Studios. By comparison, the possible number of people working on site on any one day can be in the region of 1,500. The SSL employees located at Shepperton are primarily responsible for the day-to-day management, organisation and maintenance of the studios and its facilities. So again, as I said earlier, it's a relatively small number of the total people that will be travelling to and from the site that are picked up in these travel plans, it would seem.
Then if we perhaps take up Mr. Dix's rebuttal to your evidence, because he refers to your section 4 on page 23 of his rebuttal, which is 4.31 onwards.
Yes.
He sets out his response to you in relation to the assessment that you've undertaken. He also refers to Warner Brothers at 447 to 449, and then provides a summary at 450 to 451. Relies in 450 particularly on Shepperton, where he says a low SOV car driver proportion is being achieved and a further lower target is proposed, and also relies on Warner Brothers, where Leavesden, where a reduction has already been achieved and a more ambitious target is, I think, now proposed. That should say, and at Elstree, SOV will be as low as 67.5% due to the location, and this would apply to production staff. I mean, what's your response in relation to the points he's made generally as to what you have said? And second, as to whether or not there is support in what he says for his 67% mode share target.
I'm just going to start with Pinewood. I mean, again, Mr. Dix makes the point that there are low sample size.
I just want
again,
your microphone may not be picking you up there.
Can you hear me? I can hear myself. So the survey results, Mr. Dix says, are based on a fairly low number. I think that's just a function of the fact that the numbers of people directly employed by the studios seems to be low. And it seems to me, at least, that the control that they have on the people and the modes that they use to travel to site is limited to their permanent staff, it would seem. Hence why the survey results are based on permanent staff. So they may be a low level, but I think that just reflects the low levels of employees that are directly retained by these film studios. However, they are a record of what does actually happen, or what has happened, and I think they are the only information we have available in terms of film studios to be able to make a decision as to whether the mode shift targets are reasonable. Now, I say they don't support 60% mode share by car driver and high levels of walking, cycling and public transport use.
And in relation to Elstree and Leavesden, which are particularly relied upon by?
So Elstree, I think Mr. Dix accepts, is in a highly sustainable location at the end of a high street in Boreham Wood. In that environment, even then, that it's only getting a 67.5% mode share by car driver. So that doesn't meet the 60% target either. And that's in the middle of a major urban environment next to high street, all the facilities that you would need within a residential zone, good accessibility to the rail network, and even then it doesn't meet the target. Shepperton, I think that the difficulty is with Shepperton, if you look at the TRIX analysis, which is what Shepperton is based on, there was 3 surveys undertaken for Shepperton. And whilst it does say that the overall results of the 2015 survey were 57% of journeys were single occupancy vehicles, the remaining 34% of car sharing would in some part be additional vehicles by their very nature, because if 57% are single occupancy and there are more cars by car sharing, there must be more on top. So again, it's going to be in excess of 60%. And if you look at the actual TRIX data that's included in appended to the transport assessment, I think it suggests that there are much higher levels of single occupancy vehicle.
And then
so it's appendix.
We may need to go to the transport assessment.
Read the transport assessment, yeah. No, because I think the Shepperton travel plan only includes the data from 2015. It just includes a summary. It doesn't actually include the raw data. That would be appendix. Sorry, Mum, bear with me. It'd be a CD 1-238 and then a letter. I'm trying to find the right one.
That may be time for a short break. Mr. Tester could find the document over the short break if that suits you.
Yeah.
Thank you. 15's fine, madam.
I missed the first said that beyond contradiction, but we're going with this 15.
Okay, just goes really fast, so we can back in. Please, okay. Perfect. Well, thank you, Mr. Wilder.